We've all heard it said that we need to love ourselves. But how exactly do you do that? It sounds all good and well, but it's not as easy as simply flipping a switch. I think that most of us would like to love ourselves. Why wouldn't you? And yet it can seem like such a challenge. The thing about love, and I've talked about this before, is that we have so many misconceptions, one of which is that love requires certain conditions. But actually, love, which is genuine and authentic, doesn't depend on any conditions whatsoever. That's why we call it unconditional love. That means there's not a standard that one has to meet in order to be loved. It might seem like there is if you look at how people relate in the world, but much of what we call love is actually something altogether different. There are so many things that we mistake for love that I'm not even going to go into all of that. I've talked about all of that before, and I'm sure I'll talk about all of that again. And so one of the reasons why we may find it so challenging to love ourselves is in part due to some of our misunderstandings about love. We have all kinds of misconceptions. And a lot of these erroneous ideas actually get in the way of authentic love. Another thing about love that I've emphasized before is that it has a great deal to do with acceptance. And so I would suggest for anyone who is struggling to love themselves to forget about love for the moment. Because chances are your misinterpretation of that word might be getting in the way. So just put that idea completely aside for now, and instead focus your attention simply on self-acceptance. Self-acceptance means that whatever flaws we may have, whatever imperfections, weaknesses, inadequacies, whatever mistakes we've made, and so on, that we accept all of this about ourselves. And whatever judgment we're carrying in regard to all of that, we let that go. The thing about judgment is that it's really just an interpretation, which means it's not entirely factual. In fact, sometimes it's entirely false. And sometimes it's based on something factual, and so it can seem difficult to distinguish between the fact and the judgment. So to give an example, if I make a mistake, that's a fact. If I think that I'm utterly useless because of that mistake, that's a judgment. That's a belief, that's an opinion. That's not actually true. And the thing is we have all kinds of negative self-judgments and limiting beliefs, all of which are untrue. I'm useless, I'm worthless, I can't do anything right, I'm not good enough, I'm a loser, I'm ugly, I'm unlovable. All of these are beliefs and judgments, and as real as they might seem at times, they're not actually true. Most, if not all of them, are over-exaggerations. If you fail at one thing, all of a sudden you're a failure. All of a sudden you're useless, or a loser, or whatever. Because of one thing, now for the rest of your life, you've decided that you're incapable of doing anything right. And the more that you believe that, the more you'll make mistakes, which will seem to confirm that belief. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But the reality is that you failed at one thing, or made one mistake, or whatever it happened to be, and that's it. It happens to everyone. You can learn from it, grow from it, let it go and move on, or you can let it define you for the rest of your life. So here's the thing, we all make mistakes. We all fail at something. We all have flaws and imperfections, weaknesses, and so on. There's not one single person in this world who is perfect. It might seem like there are, or it might seem that some people are better than others in some way, but really we're all pretty well balanced, meaning that we often have just as many strengths as we have weaknesses, just as many advantages as disadvantages, and so on. So a person who is really well skilled in one particular area is probably very unskilled in a number of other areas. A person who is very knowledgeable in some particular topic is probably ignorant in a number of other topics. A person may have certain attractive qualities about them, but also have a number of unattractive qualities. And so there is no one in this world who measures up to every standard of perfection. So let's not pretend that you don't have some flaws in your personality or your skill set or your appearance or whatever it may be. In fact, you're probably well aware of these imperfections. The question is, can you accept them? Can you accept the fact that you're not perfect? Acceptance means that we're able to acknowledge these things, but without the added judgment. We let the judgments go. We're just noticing. We see the imperfections, and we're simply allowing them to be there. Look, if you've spent your entire life judging yourself, condemning yourself, putting yourself down, what good has any of that done? Has it changed any of these things that you don't like about yourself? Has it fixed any of your flaws? Or has it simply caused you to feel miserable about yourself? In other words, that approach hasn't done anything to improve your life. It hasn't fixed or changed or resolved anything. So why not try something else? Why not shift from condemnation to acceptance, which means that we're not necessarily trying to change anything about ourselves, but really only changing our attitude in regard to these things. Secondly, stop comparing yourself to other people. You're not other people, you're you, and you're unique. Everyone is. We're all unique in our own way. We all have our own various gifts and talents, personality and characteristics, temperaments and inclinations, and so on. It might seem that some people are better skilled at some things than others, but there are also areas where they struggle. Some people have all the looks, but they might not have all the intelligence to match. Some people are really talented in one particular area, but there's other things that they're terrible at. That's just how it is. No one is good at everything. We all have our own flaws, and there's nothing wrong with that. Where did we get the idea that there's anything wrong with not being absolutely perfect? When we look at other people, it might seem like some are really skilled at certain things, or really fortunate in some areas, or really confident in their abilities and so on. And maybe what they're really good at is expressing their best qualities without letting their imperfections stand in the way. What I mean is that some people simply focus more on what they have rather than what they lack. They focus on what they're naturally good at rather than on what they do poorly. They focus on their best qualities rather than their worst qualities, and so their best qualities tend to outshine their imperfections. So this is something that we all need to learn to do as well. While we all have flaws and imperfections, we all have positive qualities as well. We all have areas where we're skilled at something. We all have virtues that are deeply valuable. But when we're too much focused on the imperfections, we tend to overlook these positive aspects and qualities, even to the extent that sometimes we don't even see them at all. And again, it's not about pretending that we don't have flaws. We still recognize that, but without the judgment. Just recognizing the imperfections as they are, but without being ashamed of it, because that's just a part of being human. And with the same attention, we recognize our positive qualities. We all have them, so take time to recognize your own. Recognize how valuable those qualities are. Learn to appreciate them and give your attention to cultivating and expressing them. The other thing I would say is don't be dependent upon the opinions of others. A lot of the judgments that we have about ourselves are actually other people's judgments, and we tend to build our sense of worth, our self-esteem on what others think of us. But the truth is that it doesn't really matter what anyone else thinks. It really only matters what we think. But we can't even have a clear perspective of ourselves if it's clouded by other people's opinions. So we need to put all of that aside and simply see ourselves just as we are without all the added judgment. We might also have judgments about ourselves relating to whether certain people like us or not. What that really means is that we're dependent upon others to validate us, to accept and approve of us. And if they don't like us, we tend to interpret this as an indication that there's something wrong with us. Maybe there's something wrong with them. Do you ever consider that? Maybe it's not you. The thing is our value doesn't depend on whether or not other people recognize it. Some people are simply incapable of recognizing it. The problem is that we assess our own value based on what other people think, whether or not they see any value in us. Really, we just need to recognize our own value independent of what anyone else thinks or says or does. If you have any qualities which are valuable, if you have any skills or talents, knowledge or wisdom, compassion, kindness, empathy, and so on, these things have value regardless of whether or not anyone else recognizes it. The question is, do you recognize it? That's really all that matters. When we talk about loving ourselves, what this means is that we're not depending on anyone else to love us. We're not depending upon anyone else to assess our value. We're recognizing the value already within us. We're giving our attention to those qualities and virtues and appreciating them, cultivating them, expressing them. Now, this whole process of shifting our attention in this way may take some practice. We may have to keep reminding ourselves of our virtues and abilities. We may have to keep reminding ourselves that other people's opinions are just opinions, and it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks about us. We may have to keep reminding ourselves that despite our flaws, no one is perfect, but we all have something of value to offer. Learning to love yourself is a process of removing the barriers which stand in the way of love, removing the false and limiting beliefs that we have about ourselves, the judgments and the shame and so on, and shifting our focus onto those things which we can appreciate about ourselves. All of this takes time and attention, so be patient with that process. Most importantly, be patient with yourself. Be kind to yourself. Be gentle. Be forgiving. Be accepting. Learn to accept yourself just as you are.
If you find value in this content, be sure to like, share, and subscribe.